Hello, this is Cho of the Shining Colors Discord, and welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. Today we have 3 cards that we need to talk about: a new Produce SSR for Nichika, a Produce SR for Hinana, and a Support SR for Hiori. And don't worry, for those who are not necessarily worried about the review right now, we are working on a really quick guide for Landing Point that hopefully should be out in the next couple weeks or so. We're still trying to get everything ironed out, and I'm going to be a little indisposed next week, so we'll have to see how everything pans out. So, let's go ahead and get started with the review. Starting things off, we have Nichika. In a somewhat surprising reveal, we have our first SHHis card available in the gacha, who follows the trend of the first P-SSR always being the leader of the unit. Nichika's card immediately breaks conventions by introducing a new type of buffing, as well as gives us hints as to where the game may be going through her gold passive. Her skill tree is a little different compared to most SSRs, so be ready to adapt for Nichika's sake. Naturally, the biggest issue going against Nichika at the moment is the lack of a gacha Mikoto as her counterpart, meaning you'll be depending on Idle Road Mikoto for the moment. Her memory appeal is slightly on the weaker end, but a Produce SSR Mikoto might solve that if we continue to see this new buffing style. Also, I 100% wasn't expecting Mikoto to just be right there in her fest animation. It's so blatant compared to anybody else's that have done the same thing, so pretty neat to see. Her roles are center, maybe, but she's definitely a buffer, and she has some memory gauge boost associated with her too. I moderately recommend pulling for Nichika at best, probably just a low recommendation overall. We don't really know where she's going yet, but if you like Nichika, obviously it's worth pulling for her only card currently. Nichika's initial skill is a visual 3.5 appeal that increases all Mikoto appeals by 0.5 for 4 turns. This then links into a visual 50% for 5 turns. The explanation for that is actually pretty simple. Say Mikoto has a 2.5 appeal. If you use Nichika's skill first, then that Mikoto's appeal is upgraded to a 3.0. If it was a 3.0, it becomes 3.5, etc, etc. So it's very useful for helping to ramp up damage. The max version of this is a Dance 4.0 appeal that increases Mikoto's appeals by 1.0 for 4 turns, and links into a Dance 50% up for 5 turns. Nichika's 1-star passive is a Dance visual 25% up that requires the turn count to be 4 or earlier. This is a 20% chance to activate twice. Her 2-star passive is a Dance and visual 50% up and memory gauge 10% boost that requires your total unique number of units to at least be 3 or higher. It has a 30% chance to activate 3 times, and this also unlocks a visual plus 50 uncap. This would mean that your team needs to consist of Nichika and Mikoto for the sake of SHHis, 2 pieces of 1 unit, and 1 piece from another unit. Or, you could opt for 2 members of SHHis and then 1 member from 3 different units. As long as the number of different units you have in your team is at least 3, this 2-star passive can activate. Nichika's second 2-star passive is a visual 40% up that requires an active visual buff. This has a 20% chance to activate twice. Her 3-star uncap is a Dance visual plus 100, and her 4-star uncap is a Dance plus 150. Her memory appeal, once maxed out, is a Dance 2.0 appeal that links into a Dance visual 0.8 appeal. For the support recommendations. With Nichika, we don't have any particularly dedicated supports just yet. We also only have Wing currently to use as well, so really just pick your best visual and dance supports and go for it. Dual Stat is a very safe bet for the time being, as is Tri-Stat. The alternatives can be really open-ended currently as well, so don't stress too much about it. It's going to be a little bit before SHHis get to shine, so picking comfier supports is still completely valid. That's why we see some Audition Mastery cards in here, and even some of the simpler SRs. Anything to keep the run simple and easy will be fine for now. No unit grade yet, because we don't really have it. As a center, we don't really know for Nichika. It's honestly too early to tell how good or bad Nichika might be as a center. Just going off the values now, she's nothing particularly special. Mikoto might end up being a stronger center than her, so we'll leave it at that really. Supposedly, the Mikoto appeal buff does not apply to memory appeals, so even if Mikoto copies this buff style, Nichika doesn't benefit in this case. As a unit, I would say Nichika is kind of weird, because overall I would say she's kind of just like a middle-of-the-ground B- style unit, but if Mikoto ends up being really good, then she feels more like an A+. So that's why the A+ is there kind of more just a speculation. For now, just consider to be kind of like a B-tier unit. If Mikoto does end up taking the same buff approach, the ability these two would have by link appeal chaining into appeal buffs could lead to some pretty intense numbers for permanent units. Her gold passive is pretty interesting, and we'll have to see how it pans out in Grade Fest, though it could shine in Collabo Fest for sure. Let's just keep an eye on Nichika for the time being. Next up we have Hinana. In contrast to how relatively different Nichika is with her release, our first gacha PSR for Hinana is more of what we've seen prior with Nocchill. Relying on the hype mechanic we've seen before, Hinana's goal is to permanently buff your visual or vocal while attempting to avoid being hit as much as possible. That being said, Hinana really doesn't bring much else to the table, and lacks any attention down or reaction to help supplement her own playstyle. The other complication that this Hinana brings is the fact that Hinana was one of the other sources of reaction for Nocchill. While it wasn't for very long, those Hinana help keep the playstyle for Nocchill intact, while this SR depends on assist that mostly doesn't exist yet. While you can totally make this Hinana work in certain circumstances, it might be too much to put together without feeling like more of a chore. Her sole role is as a buffer, and I don't really recommend pulling necessarily for Hinana unless you're a big fan. Hinana's initial skill is a visual 2.0 appeal that increases your visual by 15% until you're damaged. This links into a visual 2.0 appeal. At max, she unlocks a vocal 2.5 appeal that increases your vocal by 30% until you're damaged, and links into a vocal 2.0. Hinana's 1-star passive is a visual 15% up that requires your mental to be 75% or higher, and has a 40% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a vocal 30% up that requires the turn count to be 3 or earlier. This also has a 40% chance to activate once. Her 3-star uncap is a vocal plus 100, and her memory appeal when maxed out is a vocal visual 40% up until you're damaged that links into a vocal 2.0. For the support recommendations, I feel like we've been down this path before. Well, bring your best Nocchill supports first and foremost, then fill in the blanks with whatever insight token you're missing for Grad, or idea you're missing in TFD. As for the alternatives, you guessed it, it's almost the same recommended supports from P-SSR2 Hinana, which you can see in the card above. Space Kaho gets recommended over Meguru from that video solely because her paired with Choco and Rinzai are stupidly powerful. You really can't go wrong with your support selection as long as you pick vocal and visual. As for team recommendations, your best bet in using this Hinana is to slap her into vocal Nocchill and hope for the best. While I could try to recommend a split vocal visual Nocchill like we saw back with Hinana 2's video, I think that team is significantly worse by using this Hinana in particular. It's perfectly doable, but I imagine you'll run into quite a few number of hangups, and I don't think it's ultimately that worth it. On to the grades. Hinana as a center earns a C-. Meh. It's a fairly lackluster buff with not enough payoff. There's not much to expect from a gacha PSR, so you're better off utilizing either vocal or visual Nocchill centers like Toru or Koito depending on your lineup. As a unit, also in the range of C- to C. Hinana runs into the issue of just not being enough of a buffing asset when you consider that Hinana 2 is probably the most consistent source of reaction for Nocchill right now. If you ignore that part of it, Hinana still doesn't have enough power to compensate this kind of utility loss, leaving her as a somewhat underwhelming and not super interesting card. Lastly, we have our Event SR, Hiori. Our Event SR this time is Hiori, further cementing the Hiori monodynamic in a pretty cute way. Continuing the trend for Hiori supports, she's another source of Audition Mastery SP, this time hitting +4. While it's not as good as her Gacha SR Hiori or her limited SSR, it's a start for teams that want to audition their way through Wing. She's not outstanding in any particular way, but she's a fine enough beginning. Her support skills are Idol's Bond, Promise Recovery, and Rest Boost, and her two unique support skills are Audition Mastery SP, reaching +4 at level 65, and Vocal Mastery Mental, reaching +6 at level 60. Her TFD idea is Visual, her Insight token for Grad is Visual, and her, well, what do we call it? Landing Point token? We'll figure that out. Her focus in Landing Point is Vocal. Hiori's 1-star passive is a vocal 12% up that requires you to be in the vocal position. This has a 30% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a vocal 20% up as long as your star count is less than or equal to 3. It has a 30% chance to activate once. Her 3-star uncap is a vocal +50, and her 4-star appeal is a vocal 2.3 that increases your vocal dance and visual by 10% for 2 turns. Her event passive is a vocal 8% up that requires Hiori on your team, and it has a 30% chance to activate twice. Hiori gets a C. Hiori is painfully below average, and the SP Audition Mastery is the big thing that helps her from not being a D tier unit. This is our first card that showcases the new format for landing point ideas? Tokens? We'll figure out what we're calling these eventually. That's probably the most notable thing about this card outside of her Audition Mastery. You might as well farm for Hiori while she's here. And that will do it for the video today. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. Again, we're working on putting together a quick video for Landing Point, not a full-on guide just yet, as we still don't really know what we need to be doing in Landing Point necessarily, but at least enough to help you get by. Next time we'll talk about whatever banner comes next, so let's look forward to it together. I've been Cho, thanks for watching, have a wonderful rest of your day.